Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Build Your First Pipeline, Part 1, Virtual Training. I hope everyone enjoyed the product keynote and product demos. Definitely some exciting things on the horizon. Luckily, you can get your hands on a new product feature today, which is exactly what we'll be doing in this session as I introduce you to this powerful new technology. Many of you are already QuickBase users, builders, and advocates. And what we're doing with pipelines is just expanding upon that already robust QuickBase functionality that you know today with a brand new technology that will allow you to automate workflow across many third-party integrated solutions that you might be using. So the value we hope you come to realize with pipelines is that it enables you to connect your ecosystem. But in today's intro level training, we're going to introduce you to pipelines and show you a couple different QuickBase to QuickBase pipelines. This will hopefully get you comfortable enough and really lay the foundation to begin using the technology to branch outside of QuickBase into those other platforms. So for our more advanced and technical users joining us today, this session will still be beneficial to you, but be sure to check out some of the more advanced pipeline sessions we're offering throughout the conference. So my name is Nate Underwood. I've been a customer success manager at QuickBase for about 2 years now. And aside from working closely with my clients and supporting them really however I can, I love digging into the QuickBase product. I'm always trying to learn that next new exciting thing that I can do with QuickBase. I'm located in our Salt Lake City office, although as I'm sure many of you are too, I'm working from my house today. So welcome to my home. Previous to coming to QuickBase, I worked for a couple different healthcare IT platforms. I was implementing and optimizing those systems for both inpatient and outpatient healthcare organizations. And if anyone joining me on this webinar today is also from that world, you know how interoperability is a huge challenge, just like it is across many industries. So I'm hopeful that pipelines and QuickBase is going to be able to address many of those challenges with this new technology that we'll be diving into today. So why pipelines? Well, before I even jump into the agenda or get into really any detail, I want to show you a pipeline in action so you know you have a good idea of what we're working towards today. So let me actually go ahead and pull up QuickBase. Awesome. So really honestly to show you what I'm going to do here, I'm kind of going to jump over the use case that we're going to be using today and just go ahead and create an incident report. So I'm going to create an incident report in this incident report table, and just know that my goal here is to have incident actions automatically created when I do that. So let's go ahead, create a new incident report. You'll notice obviously there's no incident actions created yet. I'll go ahead and choose a location for my incident. I'll say that this was a material spill, and I'll say that it happened yesterday. All right, so I'll go ahead and save. And as I allow that to save, just know that my end goal here is really to, not have to manually create any of the incident actions, because obviously that's going to take time. And really, I want to just make sure that I'm saving my end users the time and the effort of having to go in and actually manually create each individual incident action when I create that report. So when I scroll down here, you should see that we have 4 incident actions that were automatically created once I created that incident report. So some of you might be thinking, all right, Nate, well, I can do that with automations. That's actually true. You can do something very similar with automations today. But let's talk about, why you might do this with pipelines. So I'm going to go ahead back to my presentation here and talk about some of the things that really set pipelines apart from some of the other features that exist in QuickBase. So the first thing is superior scalability. Automations have been great for our clients, including me. I love automations, but we really just want to expand upon them. They are one of the most heavily used features, but the pipeline's infrastructure really has been architected to handle dramatically more volume, and they're much more reliable as well. Second, pipelines allow for increased complexity. So in part 2 of this session, which is going to happen tomorrow, and I hope you'll join, I'm actually going to demonstrate some of that increased complexity that I'm talking about here. So more to come on that. And then lastly, the scalability and the complexity is really great with pipelines, and that's awesome. But the real value with pipelines is, imagine doing exactly what I just demonstrated when I created that incident report, but instead of having those records created in QuickBase, imagine them being created in Salesforce or in Jira, or send a message to Slack, or many of the other platforms that we offer those pre-built channels for. Those are things that we couldn't do with any feature within QuickBase previously, including automations. And we can do this without knowing how to write any code or create an API or anything like that. So hopefully that answers the question of why you might, use pipelines today, and really take advantage of the new technology. So with that said, let's hop into the agenda. So for today's agenda, we're going to go over, why pipelines, and we've actually gone ahead and done that already. I'm going to get into the prerequisites. I'm going to talk about what you can expect in the resources I'm going to provide you. We'll go back to that application that we saw and talk more about the use case. Then I'm going to build out 2 pipelines with you. So the first one is really going to be a templating pipeline. So we're going to copy some templates. And then we're going to schedule a pipeline. And then lastly, we're going to get into some Q&A. So hopefully at this point you have a basic understanding of QuickBase app building, but if not, that's totally cool. This session will still be relevant to anyone just wanting to see, what's possible with pipelines coupled with QuickBase. If you'd like to build the same pipelines we're covering today, you will need a QuickBase realm with create permissions. And know how to create and utilize QuickBase user tokens, and then also have permission in your realm to create pipelines. If you don't have the ability or the knowledge, be sure to check out the Empower Resource Center for some quick videos to get you started. Don't feel like you have to leave this session if you don't check the box for all these prerequisites. You can always address them afterwards. But in the Resource Center, you will find how to enable your users to build pipelines, enable the integration channels you may want to use, basic pipelines navigation, and also how to authenticate QuickBase to pipelines as well. So what to expect in today's session here. We'll kick things off by diving into our use case and app and get right to building pipelines. During that, we'll review 2 common QuickBase to QuickBase pipelines. One important point I want to make here is that the intention of this webinar is not to follow along with me and build. That can be really difficult to do during a remote session of this size. So we'll be providing resources you can reference later on. The idea being that once the training concludes, you can practice building these same pipelines I'll be showing you today, and build them out for yourself with the resources. So resources will include an app. So you can find this on the Exchange. So you can see that the title of it right here. Really just search Brady Oil and it should be the only one that pops up. A resource guide. So this will include the use case I covered today and tomorrow. And also step-by-step instructions with screenshots. So it's, it should be really helpful as you're going and building these pipelines. And then lastly, live Q&A. I'm actually monitoring the Q&A section of this webinar with some other QuickBase employees right now to answer your questions throughout the session. So we'll also have time at the end to address any questions we don't get addressed in the Q&A feature. And then, of course, we're also going to have the recording of this webinar that you can reference at any time. All right, so let's get into our use case and review our app, and then we can actually get into building some pipelines. All right, so Brady Oil Company is based in West Texas, where it has several oil drilling operations across that part of the state. Now, recently, the company has been fined for a number of reasons. So let's take a closer look at one of those reasons. And that is going to be our first exercise here. So the problem is the problem that we're trying to solve for right off the bat here is really the failure to complete certain actions when an incident report is filed. So every incident report filed requires certain actions to be completed. So a number of fines were paid in 2019 because these actions were not taken. And the reason is most employees really just aren't aware of what actions need to be completed, or they just forget to complete them because they don't have a great way of tracking and managing those actions. So you might remember, this is exactly what I demonstrated at the beginning of the session that we're trying to solve for here. So, we build out the app, right? We saw the application. The app by itself is a great way for tracking and managing incident reports and the related actions. However, we want to take it a step further, and we want to automate as much of it as we can to ensure there's no room for human error or forgetfulness. And to do that, we're going to use pipelines. So I'm going to jump back into my QuickBase application. I'm actually going to go to the home table over here. And you'll notice right away that the home page, isn't use case related, right? Really, I built this application for the use case, but also as a resource center for pipelines. So here you're going to find the Brady Oil use case. So if you want to read in detail about what the use case is, you can do that here. I also have a lot of resources right up here in the center. Those resources include specific things on the left-hand side for specifically this webinar and this use case, and then also some general resources about pipelines as well. So be sure to check those things out. And then we also have a resources table right within the app. That's where all these resources live. But the rest of the application is really built around our actual Brady Oil use case. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop into our first table here. So this is where we opened up the presentation, where I went ahead and created an incident report. You'll notice that these incident reports, there's nothing too crazy about them. They do have an incident type, and that's going to be an important piece that I want to point out here. So each report does have an incident type. In this fictional use case, I've only included 2 types. In the real world, there'd probably be much more. But that's where I can go ahead and document the type of incident that occurred there. So as we saw, when I go ahead and click into one of these incident reports, I can see basic information about that report, but then I also see our related incident actions. So those incident actions actually live in this incident action table here. And it's important to note each one also has a incident type associated. Lastly, for this use case anyways, we have a templates table. So let's go ahead and click into that. Let me explain what this template table is, because it is important that we have a good understanding of this. So our template table is simply a place where we store every possible incident action that could be associated with a report. So as you can see here, we have incident actions of the collision type, and we have incident actions of the material spill type. So the idea is anytime that a report is filed that is the collision type, we want to automatically associate all of these collision type incident actions to that report. All right. So really, this is just a table that's housing these templates that we're going to leverage to copy our actual incident actions into this table when we file a new report. So now that we have a pretty good understanding of the app here, let's jump back to our presentation real quick. And what I'm going to do is talk a little bit more about this first exercise before we actually go ahead and build it. I just want to make sure we have a really good understanding. So the first thing we're doing is we're going to create a new incident report. Once we do that, that's going to, and the important thing again here to note is that we have an incident type, right? We're going to select that when we actually create the report. So creating that report is our trigger, which brings us to our next step, which is searching our template table to find any templates that match the same incident type. Once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and create our incident actions, right? And what we're going to do when we create those actions, so let's say we file a material spill incident report, we're only going to want to find those templates that are of the same type, material spill. And what we're going to do is then copy the values of those to our incident actions that we just created, right? And then the last thing we want to do once we've done that is we want to go ahead and relate it back to that report that triggered this entire process here. So hopefully you have a good understanding of really what we're trying to do with this pipeline. So now let's go ahead and jump into pipelines and actually build this out. So I'm going to go ahead and click on pipelines right over here. The first thing I'm going to do is turn off the pipeline that I used in my very first demonstration, because we don't want to end up with duplicates. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new pipeline. Now, if you're not familiar with this screen, the My Pipelines page that I was just on, or maybe you're not familiar with this screen, which is kind of like my blank canvas where I can build a new pipeline, I'd encourage you to go check out the Resource Center. Again, there's some really quick videos that'll just orient you with both those things. So the first thing I'm going to do is give this a good name. So we're building this pipeline in our our compliance app, our safety compliance app. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I include my app name in the name of my pipeline, because as we know, pipelines doesn't live in each individual app, and instead they live outside your application. So we just want to make sure we give it a good name that's going to help us know which app this is related to. So think about what we're doing here. We're actually creating incident actions. So let's go ahead and call this create incident actions. And now we have a good descriptive name, so we can always know what we're doing here. So you might notice I only have QuickBase showing in my channels. That's because I'm not in all, I'm only in my start. For today's and tomorrow's session, we're only going to be working out of QuickBase, so I went ahead and started that. For those of you that might be following along, you'll notice that I don't have to authenticate here to QuickBase. I've already gone ahead and done that. Again, if you want to know how to authenticate to QuickBase, you can go ahead and check out the Resource Center or the instruction guide that you can find in the Brady Oil app. Both of them have the details on how to authenticate to QuickBase. So what I'm going to do here, if we think about our first use case and what we're really trying to accomplish, we're creating an incident report, and then once we create that incident report, we're going to do some other things. But the first step is let's create that incident report. So that's really going to be our trigger. So a record is created, and where is that created? In the table report. If I search that, find my incident report here. Once I've defined my table, the next thing I want to do is define, okay, in that table, in the incident report table, what fields am I concerned with? What fields do I want to leverage later on in my pipeline? And in this case, I'm really concerned with my incident type, because my incident type is going to, drive a lot of the rest of this pipeline. It's going to identify, which of those templates we want to copy. So we want to identify that here. Once we've done that, we can actually move to our next step. So our trigger is all set here. Basically, it's just saying, anytime a new record is created in my incident report table, do something. So trigger's good. We don't need any conditions. We're going to run this no matter what. So no conditions are needed. So what are we doing next? Once we actually trigger this pipeline, if we think back to what we're doing here, we're going to the template table. We're going to find all of the templates, the incident action templates that match our incident type in the report trigger. So to do that, we're going to go over here to our actions. We're going to find this query, also known as search records, and we're going to tell it to search our template table. So I'll go ahead and define that here. Now, when I define that table, Pipelines is going to say, okay, which fields do you want me to look at? And that's what this box is for here. I can define all the fields that we care about in that table. So there's a handful here, so I'm going to go ahead and pull them in. Oops, there we go. Actions, and then days to complete. We want to pull that in. Our description as well. Priority, and just a couple more here. We want status, and we want incident type as well. All right, so there's a handful of fields that we just defined. And really what that's going to do is we're going to be able to find the data in that field and leverage it later on. Great. So the next thing that we want to do is, as we scroll down here, is we actually want to add a query this time, or a condition, because when we search our incident actions template table, we don't want to find every record that lives there, right? We only want to find the ones where the incident type matches our report that was just created. So what we can do is we can add a condition to do exactly that. So I'll go down here, I'll find my incident type, and that's available because I've defined it up top here. And we're going to say when incident type is equal to, now here's a lesson learned for me. The first time I ever built a pipeline, I defined this, and then I clicked in here and I was like, oh great, I can define material spill, and then if I do that, I'll have to go and I'll have to define the other one later on, collision. So instead of actually defining a hard set value here, what I can do is I can use pipeline's ability to be dynamic, which is really powerful. And what I can say is, you know what? All I want to do actually is match the incident type in my trigger. So what I can do here is go up to my trigger, right? So this is step A. Step A is our record create. And what I can do is find that incident type field. I can drag it down here. Oops, let me scroll down a bit. I can drag it down here and place it right in that field. And there we go. We can say anytime my incident type in the table I'm searching equals the incident type in my incident report, that's the record we want. And we want to grab that record. And once we've found all the records that match our criteria there, what do we want to do? For each one, we want to do something. And if we think about it, well, we want to actually create new incident actions. So we're going to come over to the right-hand side here, and we're going to create a record. So we're going to drag that in. We're going to define our table. So where are we doing this? We're doing it in the incident action table. So I'll define that. And here is where, again, we're going to select the fields that we want to use later on. So we're creating a new record here. So really what I want to do in this step is define all the fields that I want to actually populate data into in the pipeline. So remember, we're copying from our templates to our incident actions. So we're going to actually be populating a lot of fields here. So there's a handful that I'm going to define. So just like we did before, we want to define the action. We want to define the description, the priority, the status, and days to complete, as well as the last one, which is our related incident report. And that's a really important one, and I'll explain why in just 1 second here. So once I've defined those fields, you'll notice that they immediately appear down below. And what we're going to do here is we're going to leverage our template table. We went and we searched the template table in step B, and we found the templates that meet our criteria. And now we're just going to kind of play a matching game where we say, okay, we're going to copy the value from the template into our incident action. So status would be status, and then description, of course, would be description. And so we can just go through here and match these up just by dragging and dropping, which is really nice. All right. And that's just copying the value of that field in the template table down into our brand new action that we're creating. The last thing we want to do here is populate our related incident report field. So our incident report triggered this whole thing. And so what we're going to do is we're going to scroll up. We're going to go to our incident report here. We're going to grab our record ID, and we're going to drag it down into the related incident report. And what that's going to do is make sure that that relationship between the incident report and then the subsequent incident actions, they're related, right? If we didn't do this step, then we'd end up with a bunch of orphaned records that wouldn't be tied to any report, and of course that wouldn't be good. So we've actually gone ahead and, believe it or not, we completed our first pipeline. So let's go ahead and actually, one last step here is simply turning it on. Great. So you'll notice that this box appears. This box is great for testing brand new pipelines that you've built, because what it's going to do is show us the pipeline run, which is really cool. So we're going to go ahead and jump back to our app. So let me just duplicate this, and I'm going to go to my apps, and I am going to go into my app. And so let's test this out real quick. So I'm going to create a new incident report. I'm going to give it a location. We're going to say that this time is a collision. We'll say that it happened earlier this week. And I'm going to go ahead and save. And now that just triggered the pipeline. So if we actually go back to our pipeline, we can see that it's actually running right now. And sure enough, it's saying, okay, step A, we triggered, but via a new record being created. And then we searched the template table and we found 5 records that meet our criteria. If we scroll down, we can actually see all 5 of those records that it found. And if we took a close look at this, we'd actually see that it was saying, oh, yep, this is the incident type that we defined in the pipeline that met our report. And so this matches our criteria. And then for each one of those that we found, we're going to create a new record. So that's the final step here, is creating that record. We can see it created 5 of them because it found 5 of those templates. So we can go ahead and close this. Then we can hop back to our applications. If I scroll down here, sure enough, I can see 5 new incident actions created automatically once I created this incident report. Awesome. So success, we've solved one problem with our pipeline. So let's jump back to our presentation here. And while we do that, I'm going to take a sip of water. There we go. And pull up exercise 2. So what's the second thing we're trying to solve here? So the second reason the company is being fined is because they are not routinely inspecting their equipment. So equipment must be inspected on a schedule. The issue is the company tracks equipment inspections in an Excel file. And because employees must proactively check that upcoming inspection for upcoming inspection dates, they are often missed. And because of that, fines pile up. So we're going to create a pipeline that rarely checks the equipment table for upcoming inspection due dates. If the pipeline finds equipment with an upcoming inspection date, then it should create an inspection record. So just like we did before, I'm going to hop back into our application, and I'm going to talk about the tables that are going to be involved in this pipeline. So we've already talked about these 3. That leaves us a couple more here. So we're going to start off in the equipment table. So again, equipment has to be inspected on a schedule. So here we can see 4 pieces of equipment we have listed out. We can see the type, we can see the status, some other information, but really what's important here is our inspection cadence, right? So depending on the type of equipment, it could have a different inspection cadence. Some of it needs to be, inspected on a monthly basis, some of it just a yearly basis, and then there's some that are in between. So with each having its own inspection cadence, that means that it's kind of tricky to figure out when the next inspection date is. But luckily with QuickBase, that's pretty easy. So, through all native QuickBase functionality, I'm able to, easily calculate the next inspection due date for each piece of equipment, as well as the number of days left until that inspection due date hits. So that's really the important field I want to call out here. So if we actually click into one of these, we'll see that this piece of equipment is actually due for inspection in 14 days. We can see down below, we have our related inspection. So we have our inspection table here. And we can just see this embedded report that shows the last time that this piece of equipment was inspected. And that was back in February. And that inspection was complete. And we're almost ready for our next inspection, which is supposed to happen later this month. Now, if I'm an employee, I'm gonna have to come here. You know, this is great. It's better than Excel. Let's just make that clear. But if I'm an employee and I'm supposed to be inspecting this equipment, I'm gonna have to still come here and check when the next inspection date is. Well, I don't want to do that. I want to be notified, and I can easily do that with pipelines. So let's actually think about how we're going to do that really quickly by going back to our presentation. So for this second problem, the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to schedule a pipeline. So when we schedule that pipeline, we're going to set it to run every night. And when we actually do that, what we're going to have it do is trigger a search of our equipment table. That equipment table has that days until next inspection due field. So that's that field that just holds the numeric value of like 14 days, for example, just letting me know that in 14 days, this inspection is due to be completed. So we're actually going to have this pipeline search for upcoming inspections. And then if it finds one, so if it finds, hey, this is coming up, we need to actually inspect this, it's due in 2 weeks, we're going to go ahead and create a record, a new inspection record. And that inspection record, we could do a number of things with that. Once it's created, we could send a notification to our inspection crew, whatever we want. There's a lot of stuff we could do with that, but we just want to create it at this point. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then the last piece, we want to make sure that we relate that inspection report back to the equipment that triggered it, right? So that's our goal here. And let's go ahead and jump back to pipelines and go ahead and actually build it out. So I'm going to go back to my pipelines page. I am going to click create a new pipeline. And let's think about what we want to do here. So again, in the second exercise, we're going to schedule a pipeline. And let me actually give this a good name first, just like we did before. We're going to say create incident report. That would be an inspection report name. Let me fix that. There we go. All right. So let's think about what we're doing. We're going to actually have a scheduled pipeline run that's going to check our equipment table. So how do we actually schedule a pipeline? The way we do that is by actually, instead of using one of these defined triggers like we did previously, we're actually going to start with an action. And if we start with an action, that's going to give us the ability to put it on a schedule. So if you remember, the first thing we want to do is actually search that equipment table, right? So now that I've actually defined an action here, you'll notice that once I choose a table, and that's going to be our equipment table, of course. Once I define that equipment table, you'll notice that up here on the right-hand side, I now have this scheduled pipeline. So we know that we want to schedule this pipeline to run every night and check that table for upcoming dates. Before I actually set it to run every day, I just want to call out that we can actually set this to run every hour if we want, something we weren't previously able to do with scheduled automation. So that's pretty cool. So I'll go ahead and select run on a daily basis. I can actually select my time here. So we're not going to be guessing when this is running. I'm just going to say this will run at midnight every night. So I'll keep that as is. We'll go ahead and click schedule pipeline. And then let's continue to build out our pipeline here. So we've defined our equipment table. What fields are we concerned with here? So when we're actually searching that equipment table, what do we want to take into account? We care about the status of the equipment. and I'll tell you why in a second. And then we care about, of course, our days until next inspection due, because that's really going to tell us whether or not an inspection is due or not. Once we define those things, we're going to go ahead and define a condition here. And this is going to be status. So this is why I chose status above, is because if we're going to be, checking for upcoming inspections, we don't care about a piece of equipment that's not in service, right? There's no reason to inspect it if we're not using it. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if our status is not out of service, then go ahead and check for the upcoming date. So that's where we're going to define this. We're going to pull in our days until next inspection due. We're going to say when that is equal to, and we're going to say 14 for this. So when our next inspection due is 2 weeks away, essentially, let's go ahead and create an incident report. And we're going to say 2 weeks will give us plenty of time to actually go ahead and get that done. So there, we've gone ahead and we've completed step 1 here. We've defined what records we want to find. For each one we find, what do we want to do next? So here we are, just like we did before, we're going to actually create a record. So I'm going to drag that over. And where are we creating that record? We're creating it in the inspections table, of course. Oops, let me see if I can spell. There we go. Find our inspections table here. And what fields do we care about here when we're creating this new record? Well, we're not really creating any, we're not really copying any values from anywhere. We're just creating a new record. And all we really want to make sure is that we relate this record back to the piece of equipment that triggered it, right? So that's the only field we need to define here this time. And just like we did previously, we're going to grab the record ID out of the piece of equipment that triggered all this, so we can relate that inspection back to the related equipment. All right, great. So we've actually very quickly completed this second pipeline. So it is on a schedule, so I guess we'll have to wait until midnight for this to run. Just kidding. We can actually run scheduled pipelines whenever we want. So this is awesome. Couldn't do this with automations. So I can actually go ahead and click this right here. I can watch my pipeline run just like I did previously. So it's basically, forcing this scheduled pipeline to run. We can see the first step, we had it search our equipment table. It first was looking for a piece of equipment, that wasn't out of service. And then second, it was looking for a piece of equipment that was due in 14 days. And of course, we had one that met that criteria. And then lastly, it actually created that new inspection record. So now my employees aren't going to have to go out and, manually or and proactively go and look for dates and then manually create the inspection record. We've gone ahead and automated all of that for them. Hopping back to our application real quick here, let's actually look at that piece of equipment, which I believe was this one. Let's give it a little refresh. Awesome, look at that. We have a new inspection record, so I can go ahead and we'll go hop in here. We can go ahead and say that I inspected this and we completed it, and we'll say the inspection completion date was today. Don't need to fill out anything else. I'll go ahead and save. And awesome, now my piece of equipment, my hoist line here, not due again for another 90 days. So we've gone ahead and solved this problem. Awesome. So that's the two pipelines that we were going to walk through today. So quickly recap here. The first thing we did today in this session is copy record templates. So we went through that workflow where when we created an incident report, we copied the templates down into the incident actions table. And then what we just did is we scheduled a pipeline to check our equipment table and then create any inspection reports. And to do both those things, we used a number of different triggers and actions. So just to recap here, in the QuickBase channel, we used the trigger record created, the trigger record updated, the action of create record and the action of search record. And so what's next? So tomorrow I'll be doing a part 2 of this session. And in that part 2, we'll be doing conditional branching, which is a little bit more in depth, a little bit more advanced pipelines capability. So that's exciting. And then we're going to be doing a cross app pipeline as well. So this is going to be a live session tomorrow at 12:45 Eastern time. So I hope to see you there. I'm going to go ahead and stop my camera now, and I am going to see you in the Q&A. So thanks for coming, and I'll talk to you in just a second.